As I further dialogued with Mr. White, I was able to ask him to provide a few things for me. It should have been a simple task for Mr. White, the god of the Greek language. I asked him if he could give me one Greek lexicon that showed me that his argument even existed. It should have been easy to find one of the lexicons that Mr. White has used so often in his debates. I mean, I've heard him quote so many lexicons and Greek dictionaries over and over and over, so you know what? Should have been quite easy. Mr. White's response to me was laughter. And then he barked at me. He barked, "You give me one lexicon that says what you are affirming." Well, Mr. White, I guess we can give you just that. We'll give Mr. White the early church. We'll give Mr. White Greek dictionaries. And we'll give Mr. White Greek lexicons. The Freiburg lexicon tells us of DOULEUO, of relationship, to be a slave, be subjected, of action or behavior, perform the duties of a slave, to serve or obey, figuratively of spiritual service to God, serve, obey, of spiritual and moral enslavement to sin, appetites, be a slave to, be controlled by. The Barclay and Newman Greek to English dictionary tells us DOULEUO, it tells us it means serve, as a slave, be a slave to, be enslaved, to serve. Louanita tells us DOULEUO, a slave, be a slave, be a slave, be enslaved. What an error there. it shows us various forms of DOULEUO. The Lydell Scott lexicon tells us DOULEUO, to be a slave to one. We move on to Thayer's Greek lexicon. It tells us of DOULEUO, properly to be a slave, serve, to do service, absolutely, set the nations in subjection to other nations. Men are said who bear the yoke of the Mosaic law, using various passages to show how DOULEUO is used. Metaphorically, it tells us to obey, to submit to, in a good sense, absolutely, to yield obedience, it tells us, to obey one's commands and render him services due. It uses various usages of the Greek term DOULEO, and it shows us many of them used towards mankind, which are not in a religious context. Or wait, are they? Well, Mr. White would say they're not, because they are not referring to worship. Of course they're not worship, but they're still in a religious context. Here's a good one, the BDANG, Bauer, Donker, Arden, Gingrich, the one that Mr. White loves to use, and the one that he claims, well, actually, the one that he tried to imply supports his argument doesn't at all. It tells us about DOULEO, to be owned by another, be a slave, be subjected. It gives us examples. It shows us Galatians 4:25. It tells us to be a slave to someone. Using the Egyptians here, it gives us it tells us in Romans chapter 7 verse 6, in imagery of a change in masters, to act or conduct oneself as one in total service to another, perform the duties of a slave, to serve, to obey, to be in service to personal beings. It uses Mark 6:24, Luke 16:13. It uses various usages, and I suggest anyone that's following along this video series download and read the paper that I've worked on. It goes more into depth than these lexicons and Greek dictionaries that I've covered here. Uses various passages here to show the usage. Moving on, the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church tells us latria means, as contrasted with doulia, that fullness of divine worship which may be paid to God alone. Those are the words of the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church. They recognize, as contrasted with doulia, that fullness of divine worship which may be paid to God alone, in reference to latria. These are Greek dictionaries, these are Greek lexicons, and, well, Mr. White, you wanted some, we've provided you with some. And neither of them say, well, you can't use doulia in a religious context towards mankind, because over here we have this little entry here that says when it is used in a religious context towards mankind, it's worship. Well, none of them have that. I looked for a lot of them, but maybe James White will come out with his own Greek lexicon or Greek dictionary, and maybe he'll insert that in there. Yeah, that would be interesting. If he does, I guess I would have to buy it.